Hello Internet! Welcome to the special 4th of July edition of Romney's Reviews. When it comes to Spider-Man in film, I've been following for a while because I was a kid when the first Sam Raimi film came out. I followed them throughout when they came out throughout my childhood. I was in high school when the third one came out and had my own reactions then, like a bunch of other people. And so I was a little wary at first when they announced that they were making a fourth one. But I kind of got won over, despite how the costume, I initially thought the costume looked silly at first, but I kind of got won over when I first saw the first trailer. Biggest thing that won me over was the fact that they were going with Gwen Stacy instead of Mary Jane Watson like everybody else. You see, Gwen Stacy was Spider-Man's first love interest and was actually a bigger factor in kind of Spider-Man's evolution as a character. That just kind of showed that they were trying to be more faithful to the comics this time around, because when Disney bought Marvel, so many companies panicked, and so that's why we've been getting the reboots of X-Men, and there's an upcoming Fantastic Four reboot, because these companies don't want to lose the rights to the film rights to these characters, because they'll go back to Marvel, and they'll in turn go to Disney, which is, well, a giant media juggernaut. Kind of scary. So going into this film, I had higher hopes than I usually have with a lot of films that I go in to see. I mean, I didn't expect it to be like the greatest thing ever, but I didn't expect it to be bad, and I wasn't really that disappointed. You can tell that the people who made this, they knew that the audience going into it already knew a lot of the major stuff to the story. They knew about Peter Parker getting bit by the spider, they knew about Uncle Ben's death, and so it took a lot of the moments that everybody already knew about and moved through them pretty quickly. Instead of the grandiose scale with a lot of the origin and stuff like they did in the Sam Raimi films, they just kind of took it and said, look, you already know this bit, here it is, let's move on. One thing with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man is that there wasn't as much of the comedy on the part of Spider-Man, which is kind of a big deal because when Spider-Man's fighting all these villains and constantly putting his life on the line, he's scared out of his mind, and so the reason he makes these jokes is to kind of keep himself calm. I would have liked a little bit more, but I can kind of see why they didn't, because they don't want to overload it too much with a lot of jokes, because then it would break a lot of the tension and really take you out of the story. Now, another thing I have to say about the story is that this one is definitely more science-oriented. You can definitely see that there's a little more intelligence to it, because Peter Parker is an intelligent person. He's essentially a scientist. I mean, he made his web shooters, and they do a good job explaining how he got the stuff for the web shooters better than the Sam Raimi film. Because that was one thing I did not like about the Sam Raimi films, was the organic webbing BS they tried to give us. But with this one, they actually do a great job explaining how he made his web shooters, how he got his costume together, as well as explaining what was going on with Dr. Connors. It's a lot more science-oriented, and they do a great job of moving through stuff we already know and introducing stuff that we didn't know as an audience. There's one thing with the story that it kind of confused me, is that there are certain, well, there's two things, but they kind of are part of the same thing, I guess. But one thing is that some actions that happen in the story don't really make sense, and it's not like something major that happens. It's a very tiny scene in the grand scheme of things. It basically just kind of starts out, Spider-Man saves a kid, returns to the father, and then it kind of pays off in the end. But just the payoff of that, it just, given that they're evacuating the city and everything, and they do the thing they did, it would be kind of a spoiler if I said what they did. It's just, you'll know it when you see it, and you'll just be a little bit confused and saying, how did they arrange that, and how is that possible? So that's the one nitpick I have on that. And then the other one was that they left a plot point somewhat unresolved, and that was the case of Peter Parker finding Uncle Ben's killer. Now, I can understand from the story standpoint that they're saying, oh, he's no longer about that by the end, but if they did it, if they took their time to show that, it would have made things make a little more sense. Where if they just showed that he reflected more on it and is now more about helping people rather than hunting down the bad guy, which they do a pretty good job of showing that transition at the outset. But if they just kind of showed more of that and kind of resolved that plot line, it would have made it for a more close like more of a close-knit film. The overall scheme of this film that I liked, the best way I can describe it is that it's essentially Spider-Man being given the dark, gritty treatment, but doing it right. Because the problem that I've seen with a lot of other superhero films up until this summer was that everybody's just like, oh, The Dark Knight, greatest comic book movie ever. Let's make every superhero Batman. Doesn't work that way. At all. So with this one, it definitely is a lot darker than the Sam Raimi films. It's definitely a lot more realistic, but it still keeps the characters the same. It's still true to its source material instead of trying to essentially make Spider-Man into Batman. It's basically the darker, realistic story of Spider-Man, except done as a Spider-Man story and not as Batman in a different costume. Overall, I found this film to be, well, enjoyable. It was dark and realistic, but it still was a fun thing to watch. It kept you engaged and it had you rooting for the hero, which is always a good sign for a superhero film. And what I liked about it is that it didn't try to like build up this huge like big epic fight between like two hated enemies. It just kind of took it more realistically. Dr. Connors, aka the Lizard, is kind of a victim of circumstance and a victim of himself, and it played it from that angle instead of trying to make him like a completely insidious, hateful villain. And it really shows in just how the two characters interact with one another, since Peter Parker knows both Dr. Connors and then also deals with the Lizards and Spider-Man. And so, as a film to kick off a new franchise, this is definitely a good start to it. It does lose some points for the editing in the opening sequence, because the opening sequence, it does a good job trying to establish everything with Peter Parker's parents, but best way to describe it, it has this set rhythm, but then they have to stop it in order to allow some of the dialogue to get through, and then it keeps going at that same rhythm. If that whole bit didn't have the dialogue, it probably would have been a lot better. Now granted, the performances were pretty strong, but if they either did it at a rhythm more complimentary to allow for the dialogue, or if they didn't have the dialogue and just kept that rhythm going, it would have been a much better start to the film. It would have been like, oh, this is a bit of a nice silent prologue, and then we get to the main story. It's kind of like the overture before you get into the main musical bit of a musical. There's that bit of editing, the unresolved plot lines, some actions not making any sense. So, on my personal scale, I'm giving The Amazing Spider-Man a 4 out of 5. If you're a fan of Spider-Man outside of the Sam Raimi films, if you're someone like me who's seen a lot of the cartoons, has read quite a bit of the comics, I mean, I'm not as huge an aficionado, I don't have like a stack of Spider-Man comics as big, but I've read a lot of Spider-Man stories, so I know how he works in the comics. You'll definitely enjoy this film a lot better than the previous Sam Raimi films. So yeah, I haven't checked what film's coming out next week, so here's the film I'll be reviewing next week. So yeah, I'll be reviewing that. I hope to see you then. As you can see, my hair is, well, gone. In fact, this is the ponytail that was once on my head. It wasn't braided like this normally. The people who cut my hair, which was my college's cosmetology department, braided it for me so that it would be easier to carry inside this freezer bag. As for the reason why I'm cutting it, one, it's summer, it's hot, and I'm tired of waking up in a puddle of sweat every morning. I mean, I don't know how you girls put up with long hair. It's hell. And two, the reason why I have the ponytail in a freezer bag is that I'm donating it to Locks of Love for the second time. Second time, not fourth time, second time. Yeah, and first time I donated, I was in a bit of shock when I was cutting my hair, and so that previous time the people at the cosmetology department didn't do as great of a job because I didn't have a good idea of what I wanted my hair to look like. Whereas this time I did, so that's why I actually look fairly presentable this time. So yeah, that's pretty much the only major change that I can report this week. So, will I grow my hair out again? Probably not. Like I said, puddle of sweat, and just too much maintenance. I don't know how you girls put up with it. So, yeah. Have a happy 4th of July, or a happy Wednesday if you're watching this from outside the US somehow. So, yeah.